first of all, could you just tell a little bit about yourself? Where did you start? You know, where
did I start? Well, I started in Ohio when I was born in a hospital that also gave birth to Dean Martin and Tracy Lords, the porn star. So that was my place of birth where I got started. But at the age of 2, I already figured out I'm leaving Ohio, and so California, East LA, and then started working as an Apple employee in '88. So I moved here to the Bay Area, 1988, and after that, I don't know, like it gets confusing.
Well, we're going to talk a bit more about the confusing part then. But before that, I mean, where did you study to become a programmer?
No.
How did that? Could you tell a little bit about that?
So my experience with computers goes back to about 1969. I am older than you think, but there was actually a computer that my dad had that he worked on. It was called the Mac. There was 2 computers called the Mac, and one was called the Sioux, and they had hex panels that you would use to program them, and they had magnetic tape or punch tape, and then eventually they had these big, huge disk packs, right? So as a kid, and even core memories, like I had a jar of core memories as a kid. So I was always around this stuff and thought it was kind of interesting. And by fast forward to then around 1978, my dad ended up working at Apple. He was the site manager at Apple Irvine. So when you would get a broken logic board, the dealers would swap them out and they would be shipped to the macro support center that my dad ran. So they would fix the logic boards there and use them for part swaps. So I would hang out at that place, and you know, I got really interested in them, and honestly I stole a bunch of parts to build an Apple. But I had a black Bell & Howell Apple from all these wacky spare parts. I mean, they weren't all stolen, but some of it was. And anyway, so I had an Apple II around '79, and I was always interested in doing music, because I was also, to the other parallel track, I played piano since I was 8 years old. And then in high school I was in bands and then this and that, and played a bunch of different instruments. I can sight read music as well as I can read English, right? So after leaving high school I went to college and I studied music composition. I was going to be a composer, I thought, and write soundtracks for Hollywood. That was the dream. So to come back to the computer part, I was looking at the computer to figure out how to make it become a compositional, you know, device for composers like me to control musical instruments. At the same time, I also had built a synthesizer in 1977. I had saved up all my money and had bought, it was a company called PAIA. They made a synthesizer kit. A bunch of old voltage controlled patchwork synthesizer. So I had bought all these parts and built a synthesizer and was looking at how I could connect a computer to it. I was like doing kind of like John Cage, sort of experimental, where indeterminate music. Like I wasn't so interested in what the notes were, but more of the method for where the notes came from. So now there's all kinds of phrases and terms and science behind this, like algorithmic composition and stochastic methods and this and that. Back then, my whole concept was it was like a wind chime. I wanted to set up a random thing within controlled parameters to generate music that would repeat, but never actually repeat in a traditional sense. So anyway, I was kind of out there as a kid. I mean, like I'm 16 years old, and this is what I'm doing. So I built a synthesizer. I had built an Apple, and I was trying to figure out how to connect the two. So I figured I had to learn how to write software. So I started teaching myself programming while I was going to school to be a composer. So anyway, that all kind of collapsed at one point, and I lost, I was also the manager of a record store at the same time, trying to earn my living. So I got fired for being the manager of the record store, and then I quit school because I didn't have money, and I was just kind of sick of educational systems in general. And then and then I got kicked. The landlord kicked us out of the apartment that I was living in. So basically, everything falls all apart. And then I was like, I had to figure out how to make a living. So then I was like, maybe there's some way to make money from this computer thing. And so around 1982, I ended up working at an Apple dealership, fixing and repairing computers because I knew how to do it. So I was fixing and repairing, and so from about 1982 till 86, I had grown to be one of the more respected Apple dealerships and repairers of Apples. And so even Apple corporate would call on me to fix problem systems. So then I was like installing them at like prisons and schools. I was doing a lot of schools like in East LA, like the really bad schools. So I'd go in there and install like 50 Apple IIs at a school in an afternoon for like grade school kids or prisons. And then one of my clients ended up becoming Chiat Day, the famous advertising agency that did all the commercials at the time. So they were my client as well. And so from there, it turned into a job offer to come work at Apple in '88. So no, I never actually studied computer science.
Right.
I think that's a contradiction in terms. I don't think software engineering is even engineering. It's an art, it's a craft done by artisans, but not done by engineers. So I don't think studying, I don't know, there must be some value in studying it at a university, but in general, I think not.
Now, you said that you, so at a certain point you started working for Apple in '88. Was that immediately also associated with sounds and music? So basically your background, or okay?
Well, there was when I got there, there's all kinds of problems. We used to talk about it as there was a whole bunch of grenades to jump on, or falling on swords. And so one of the ones that I had seen that I was interested in, because I always had this computer and music theme. So one of the ones I had found was that there was a lot of problems with sound on a Macintosh. And so I was perfectly willing to learn about it and try to figure out what the problems were and then try to solve them and try to help people that had like the same passions as making sound and music on a Macintosh. And so yeah, I was working on that particular problem for a while. So '88 until around 1990, I ended up owning the problem at Apple. Partly because I knew it better than anybody else, but mostly because I was trying to not get fired because I was in this department that was kind of a troublemaker. So, I'm always getting my ass in the fire. And I got nearly fired twice in 2 years. So basically I'm trying to leave this department and looking for another job within Apple, and I took over sound around 1990. Mainly because I knew it, but mostly because I was just trying not to get fired.
Okay. Well, so when you came there in '88, Steve Jobs was already gone, right? How was the atmosphere at Apple at that time? Can you tell anything about that?
He still had a lot of the fanatical, people. I mean, they use the word passionate, but I'm not a big fan of that word. Like, look up that word in the dictionary. It's not what you think. A crime of passion, slave to your passion. It's actually a religious word. Right? The last days of Christ is the passion, and then the church used it to mean lust and sin. And so I'm not a big fan of the word passion. I think what people mean when they say passionate, I think they're saying the word enthusiasm. So it's really enthusiasm. But then I'm like, enthusiastic about what? Like, there has to be a reason. There has to be something behind it. You can't just be excited. Like, you have to have an excitement about or driven about. What's the reason for all of this? Because I think everybody was passionate. So anyway, there's a bunch of these passionate people. And it was misguided, which is why I'm not a big fan of the word passion, because to me it's kind of misguided or obsessive. And it seemed to be a lot like that. And so Apple was going in very many different directions, and everything was confused, and there was no leadership. And we went through I don't know how many CEOs. I met most of them, actually. Scully, Spindler, Emilio, and then finally it comes back to Jobs. And then so the beginning and the end points, at least in current history, has been Jobs, where the leadership and the direction and the single-mindedness has finally come back. But in that middle, yeah, it was like the the turd sandwich, like.
That's a nice phrasing, I guess. Yeah, so yeah, most of your career at Apple was in the troubled years, so to say, right? I mean, you've been there when they almost went bankrupt.
Yeah, there was actually a lot of that. Like we used to, I mean, I was also very interested in the financing of it all. Like I paid attention to the numbers. And so yeah, there was a lot of times where there was some serious problems, and like you can remember at one point there was so many different models of the Macintosh, and there was a whole bunch of weird businesses too. Like they were doing a game device, they were doing a TV, they were doing a set-top box, they doing this little handheld thing. None of those things ever went anywhere. So yeah, without direction, without rudder.
Right, right. Now, to come back to what you exactly did in those years at Apple,
yep.
Could you tell a little bit about it? What exactly did you work on? I mean, you mentioned where you started, but you know, what have you been developing during those years?
So when I first got started, it was tech support. Developers would write in with really hard questions, and they would come to a small group of us that would answer very technical programming questions. And if we couldn't answer them, we would go to the actual engineers working on the operating system to find the answers. So I ended up getting all the sound questions because no one else understood the sound manager, and no one else even understood the aesthetics of music and that kind of a thing. So anyway. A couple of years of that got me exposed to all the developers. So I was helping people like DigiDesign, for example, and all of the birth of MIDI, all of those companies, you know, Opcode and a number of these kind of companies. I was helping them. And then in 1990, I ended up working within the operating system group. So then I just took over the sound manager. It was a spot that needed filled, and because the previous guy had left a bunch of work undone and bailed at a critical moment, and I kind of like jumped on the sword that I was talking about, you know. So I took one for the team in a sense, and then it just became my problem. And so from 90 until I left in 99, I pretty much wrote all of the audio software that was coming out of Apple. I was responsible for the sound manager and making it make sound, like the ability for it to make sound. And then I completely rewrote it, got a couple of patents for those designs, became a member of the QuickTime team, and just sort of owned audio.
Now, I guess most famous, even though not a lot of people know this, but you're most famous for something that every Mac user hears pretty much every day, which is the startup chime.
Right.
Can you tell us a little bit about that? How did you, why is it the way it sounds today?
Yeah. Well, the original sound, if you can remember, on the original Mac 128 was actually kind of a cool sound. I actually like that one. It's I don't know what's the word. It's just actually it's a really, I don't know, quaint is the wrong word, but it's a good sound, like the original 128 Mac sound. And then when the Mac 2 came out, the color Mac with slots, and it was this big ass machine, there was an Apple sound chip developed, and it had programmed what I thought was actually a horrible sound. If you're a musician, you know about an interval called the tritone. If you're a religious person, it's actually called the interval of the devil. Supposedly it was the sound that would, I don't know, commit you to hell, or it was only the sound that the devil would play, or I don't know. The church had actually forbidden it. Like, if you were singing Gregorian chant, it was the most horrible possible sound in the world. It was like the biggest offense that you could make in church was to sing this interval. So anyway, the Mac was built upon these intervals. And it's just horrible. And in fact, they're perfect. Like, if you go to a piano, you can't play a perfect tritone because a piano is inharmonic. It's you know, Bach adjusted it for us so that it was not a perfect intervals. But a mathematician at Apple had decided to create a chord based upon tritones at perfect intervals. So it was absolutely the most inharmonic, dissonant sound you could make. Okay, so I got to get rid of that. So I had a chance, I had enough credibility within the hardware team and the ROM team, and I went to them saying, you know, we're building these new Macintoshes, these new big, powerful, fast Macintoshes, and they finally had a good speaker and a good amplifying system in them so that you could actually listen to, because remember, they had shitty little speakers, and they're usually aimed at the top of the desk. So sound was always an afterthought. So this was the first one. The speakers were actually facing forward. They had big, I mean, they had bigger speakers and a decent amplification system. And I was like, well, we can't play this horrid sound. So I tried to lobby for changing the sound, but like everybody's, oh, we can't change the sound. You don't know what you're asking for, you know, all this kind of thing. So basically, I just had to sneak it in. And just, you know, found the guy who was responsible for making ROMs, and I said, let's put this sound in there instead, and, you know, we'll not ask for permission and that kind of a thing. So we ended up doing it that way, and it came out and ended up becoming the sound, and then they went crazy because then everybody wanted to change it, so it went to the other extreme. Now everybody wants to change it with every new ROM, and I'm like, that's like changing the color of the Coke can with every year. Like, it doesn't make any sense. Like, it has to be one, you have to keep it, right? So when I had designed the sound, I was thinking about, you know, you're gonna hear the sound every time it crashes. So every time you crash, you're gonna reboot and you're gonna hear the sound. So it could become really annoying fast. And it would just be associated with this horrid thing. Like, oh my God, I lost all my data, you know, fucking Macintosh, you know, that kind of a thing. So I didn't want to be associated with that. I had to think of a zen, calm. I kind of thought of it as a palate cleanser, you know, to sort of be a refreshing sound. And I wanted to take advantage of the speaker, but I also knew that other speakers were shitty. So I had to design a sound that like fit a lot of different machine, different configurations, different sound environments, different speaker sizes, different frequency, you know, a lot of different things. Some had stereo, some had not stereo, a lot of different problems. So I was trying to think of a sound that I could design that would work in all these possible things. So it was actually a lot of work for, what, 2.5 seconds or whatever it is. So I just ended up fooling around and playing different chords, and, you know, it's a big fat C major chord with a lot of thick, rich sonic textures behind it. It was a stereo sound. It phased back and forth. There's a little bit of a stereo reverb, and there's a sharp transient, little chiffy sound that you would get like off of a flute or a pan flute, like a, you know, a bamboo flute. There's a little bit of that. There's a bunch of string sounds in it, and anyway, it had enough richness in it that it would sound recognizable no matter how you played it.
Right.
So that was the design behind it, and then just snuck it in, and then and that's really where it all came from.
And what year was this? What year did it first appear in the new Macintoshes?
It was the original Quadra Max. Mm-hmm. Byte magazine was still in existence at the time because they interviewed it, and I loved the article because this is the big review of the new Macintosh, and the opening paragraph said, I knew it was a good machine by the way it sounded. And I was like, awesome, like that was exactly what I was, it was a new hardware design.
Right.
Big fat speakers, and so, you know, you can actually get some bass out of it, you know. What year was that? Man, that's like, I'm really gonna guess right now, about 92, 93.
Okay, well, let's just say, I mean, it's been around for more than 15 years now, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Has it changed at all, or is it still
Not
exactly
that I know
the same?
of.
Okay.
It's the same exact bits as far as I know. When they did the Power Max, there was this guy that decided to do his own. So there's a Stanley Jordan. You know how he plays guitar? Like, there's a little Stanley Jordan, you know, hit on his guitar. It didn't work for me. It actually sounded a little bit more like the horrid tritone. And anyway, it just didn't have the balls, and it became a sound that I thought would be a little bit more of like the annoying sound.
Right.
I mean, like annoying ringtones on a phone, you know, like it became like one of those kind of sounds to me. So it ended up going back to the original, the sound that I did.
Right.
I think when Steve Jobs came back, I think he had something to do with it.
Did you ever talk to him about?
No,
about
I'm purely speculating about it, because when he came back, every machine after that went back to the one that I had done.
Right.
So I'd like to think that he had something to do with it.
Now, I mean, you must feel some kind of pride whenever you. I mean, we're here at a coffee shop, and like half of the computers here are Macs. When somebody starts his or her computer, you're just like, oh, that's my sound. I mean, does that still fill you with pride, or is?
Yeah, it's just. I mean, I mean, it's recognizable to everybody, but it's like way more recognizable to me. I mean, it's like a very familiar sound. I mean, yeah, it's like a sound like, I mean, I can hear it in my head, you know.
You must have heard it like a million times.
Oh, yeah, at least. So yeah, it's kind of interesting. I mean, it's hard to describe. Like, it's so familiar to me. I mean, it's like looking at yourself in the mirror, you know, like.
Right. And now I still want to continue a little bit about, you know, the recognition from the sound that you made. It even appeared in motion pictures now, in the WALL-E movie.
Right, WALL-E used it.
Right. What were your thoughts on that?
Well, another interesting connection there because of Steve Jobs, right? Like, he owns both companies. And, but it's no doubt that, like, the people at Pixar, I've been there and visited them a number of times and been through the hallways, and, you know, they're all Mac people. So, I mean, there's also a familiarity by Mac people about that sound, and the Pixar people are very creative, and you know, they have a very strong aesthetic sense too. So for them to use it is interesting for a few reasons. Like, one, it's a recognizable sound, but it also has, now it's taking on a I almost said iconic, but the word really is an ear-conic meaning, where it's a sound that actually has a meaning to it. You know, it's not just some sound. And so it's the startup sound of a Macintosh. But in the WALL-E movie, it's the startup sound after he's been, you know, recharged. So it's one of those. It is actually touching, huh? It is kind of touching.
Yeah.
That was, I think, was the coolest one. If you go on Amazon, I found this review of the WALL-E movie that I thought was really cool. It got me kind of choked up right there. There was a review of when the movie had premiered at the theater, and that sound had made, you know, the WALL-E chime occurs. The audience applauded. Like, it was cool to hear that, you know, like, wow, kind of like a rock star kind of moment.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Do you ever feel like the world should know that I did that? I mean, let's just say, is this your biggest accomplishment? It might be a hard question, but
it's kind of right. I don't know. That's an interesting question, man. Like, if I go down to history on my tombstone, is it going to say the creator of the Mac startup sound?
Yeah.
I mean, in a sense, it would be interesting, like satisfying, gratifying. I'd be flattered, but at the same time, I also hope there's something more, more than just, you know, I made that sound.
Right.
But it's an interesting, almost unsettling. I'm not really liking the spotlight. I really don't like being in the spotlight. These interviews and you know, the documentary movie, that kind of stuff. It's kind of humbling, like embarrassing almost. Like, I'm not really the spotlight person. I really like the back seat,
right,
and being anonymous in a sense, but at the same time, it's probably some kind of psychological thing of, you know, I wish I had the recognition, but then when I get it, I'm like a little uncomfortable by it. So I don't know. It's an interesting. I don't know what to make of it. You know, ask me again in another 20 years.
Okay, sure, we will. Now let's just briefly go to another story that for a sound even shorter than the startup chime.
Yeah.
But that some of our viewers might have heard, but I think a lot of them didn't. The famous Sosumi. sounds, because that was your creation as well, right?
Yeah.
First of all, did you create all of the sounds that you can still hear at, you know, the warning sounds that are still on the Mac, or?
Well, there's I guess it was about the same time actually. Oh, it was right before. So the new machines that came out where I made the startup sound, that was being developed with a whole new sound architecture. They had sound input. They were adding microphones at the same time, right? So there's this new line of hardware, but at the same time, in a parallel development was the System 7 new operating system, right? But System 7 kept slipping and slipping, so there was actually supposed to be System 7 running on these new machines, but the operating system kept slipping in time. So part of the sound manager had to be ripped out of System 7 to be put on this machine, and that was the emergency that I had to come in and rescue. So that was where I wanted to put this new, since I was doing all this work and rescuing the audio architecture, I wanted to put the sound, the startup sound in there as well. So when that emergency got out, I immediately went back to working on System 7, but then I also wanted to beef up the sounds that were in the operating system. And I was trying to get rid of all the older sounds like a monkey scream, you know, wild eep, and a few others. So internally I held a contest where I said anybody can give me a sound and we'll hold like a contest and I'll vote on which ones I like the best. And so there was a couple of weird ones like the file system manager engineer. He had quacked, like he just sounded like a duck and quacked, and that was one of the sounds, quack. There was another one of, later on I found, it was one of the other engineers, his wife, doing another monkey sound. That one showed up, and another guy, he had just said, ta-da. That was one of the beeps. That one ended up in the puzzle, so when you solved the puzzle, it made that sound. So there's a whole collection of sounds that I had been collecting from various places. But there was a couple that I did on my own, back to my studio, and I started composing some more sounds. One of them was this sound that was like chimes. And it was really a xylophone sort of a sound, like, and so I called it chimes, I think it was, and then and I added it to System 7 basically late at night. Once again, had to sneak it in without asking permission. Changed out all the old sounds, added the new sounds, and one of them was called chimes. And so in one of the beta internal builds of the operating system, the lawyers at the time were always reviewing the bills, because at the same time Beatles were suing us. So at the same time I had all these lawyers asking me all these questions, taking memos and internal documents and papers and all of this kind of nonsense, and it was just becoming so frustrating, and they got really paranoid about anything that hinted at something being musical or Apple doing anything musical.
Just in between, how hard is it to be a person like you working at a company that's not allowed to do anything with music, basically? I mean,
exactly.
Isn't that
exactly.
Continuous frustration?
No, that's exactly the point. That's exactly what's going on. Like everything I was talking about, like how I got started, how I got on the computer, was all based upon music. I was studying to be a composer. Like to me, it's all about music. Like, what are we supposed to be doing with these things? I mean, you know. So yeah, they're bugging us about becoming, because I mean it goes way back to the actual Apple name was able to be used because we had promised, not we, but you know, Steve Jobs had promised not to do anything musical. And so, you know, there was a couple of lawsuits and a couple of payments made to the Beatles Corporation to avoid all of these problems. So then I make the sound and I called it chime. So the internal lawyers at Apple freaked out. They thought the word chime was something too musical. And it's like, are you kidding me? Like, come on. So it just in total frustration, I walked into a meeting. I mean, it's a meeting. I think it was around midnight. There was a few of us engineers trying to get this system release done, and a very important executive happened to be there late at night because they usually took us out to dinner. So we came back from dinner, we're working, I get this note, a message saying, you can't use this sound, it's called chime. So I'm like, are you kidding me? so I'm telling him, I'm explaining to the people sitting around in the little meeting room, you know, we're drinking beers, sitting on a sofa, and I was like, I gotta come up with a new name for this, and I said, I know, just off the top of my head, I said, I know, and I'll call it Let It Beep, because it seemed to summarize everything, but I'm like, there's no way, like, if they're gonna sue me over the word chime, there's no way they're gonna let me use that name. So as soon as I said that, they said, no way, you can't do that. And I'm like, I was kidding. But like, as they're arguing that I can't actually use the name Let It Beep, I said, just off the top of my head, I said again, so sue me. And then as soon as I said it, I'm like, holy shit, that's the name. I just have to spell it funny, so that no one realizes what I'm doing. So I was like, it kind of sounds like a Japanese word. Maybe if I spell it like it's a Japanese word, that it'll get past the lawyers. And so I told I can't remember if her title was director or whatever, but the most important person in the room, I said, would you write the email to the lawyers, letting them know that we changed the word from chime to this Japanese word, and it doesn't mean anything musical. And I said, but don't say it to them. Just spell it. You know, send it as an email. Just spell it, because if you say it, they might get it. So I don't know. In the back of my mind, I think they actually did get it, but I think that they were willing to let it go.
They still had that little thread of sense of humor in them.
Little, I mean, yeah. Lawyers, it's got to be a very little thread. And oddly enough, a couple of years later, in a branding, patent, IP, lawyers industry magazine that I had never heard of because I don't practice law, I had found a little sidebar that had mentioned this story. So apparently, so the lawyers had actually figured it out. But it went in and it was shipped on System 7, and it remains there to this day.
Right. That's kind of cool, right?
Crazy. So if the startup sound or the Sosumi, like, I'm more tickled by the Sosumi thing, but I'm probably more proud of the startup sound. Yeah.
Was it always, because I mean that's like a completely nuts story, the Sosumi thing. Were there a lot of those moments? You were just like, where the hell am I? That's all it was.
Yeah, totally. It was all like that. Like,
well, I mean, of course, my next question is going to be, can you name another example where you were just like, what is this?
I could probably give you like a book's worth of those stories. The point, though, would be lost by everyone. I mean, the startup sound, because everyone's familiar with it, you know, and it shows up in a movie or two. And I swear, when I saw the premiere of the movie Jurassic Park, when they rebooted the computers, I swear I heard it then again. I mean, I would know that sound. And but I watched it recently again on a television rebroadcast, and I didn't hear it, so I don't know. Maybe they changed it or something. Anyway, but I swear I heard it back then. And then I heard it again in, I think it was a Janet Jackson song about 10-some years ago. They had sampled it. And then I heard it again on some band I found it on YouTube. Some band, it was kind of like a pop version of a Kraftwerk kind of a band, and they had a bunch of sampled sounds, and they had sampled the startup sound and then like repitched it to, had made a tune out of all these beep sounds.
I think I've heard it actually. That
one. They even used like Sosumi and a couple of others in there too. Right. So right. I mean, like, I recognize it. Like, it's like I said, it's like looking at yourself in the mirror. I mean, you recognize your own face. But yeah, there's probably a bunch of these little stories. Would they mean anything to anybody else? Is the
Well, I mean, of course, I mean, from our outside perspective, Apple is this incredibly this organization of this incredibly gifted people, and that everybody is looking in the same direction. They're all there for the same goal, and to us, it seems like, well, maybe almost like a Nazi regime, I mean, not in the same way, but I mean,
right. Although we did say fascist a lot at the time,
right? But I mean, can you see the similarities, at least from the outside view?
Right.
And from your story so far, it seems like it's a completely different from the inside. It's
well, that was sort of. Obviously, I tend to say a lot of things that I believe, whether that they're true or not is a whole different point. I mean, you can tell me I'm full of shit, and I'll probably laugh and tell you why I think that. But whatever. It's kind of the reference that I had made at one other point about it being like a sausage factory. Like, you really don't want to know how this stuff is made. You know, on the outside, it's a different thing. There's a lot of revisionist history. Partly, I guess you could say, from marketing and PR, but I think in the bigger sense, it's got a lot more to do with just cognitive dissonance. You know, the people that love Macintoshes are kind of crazy people. You know, and you can't do no wrong. Like, Apple can't do no wrong, kind of a thing. You know, you get these people like, what do you mean the iPhone isn't the best phone in the world? You know, like, are you an idiot? You know, that kind of reaction, and I'm like, no, I'm not an idiot. But it's not grand and glorious either. I mean,
right.
So I have a different perspective on it all, because I had a lot of frustrations and then all the nonsense, and then I saw how things that actually got done that became successful, they almost seem like accidents, you know, in a sense.
Could you name an example of that? Like something
like the startup sound is. I mean, that's a perfect example of like, you had to like push through things, do the wrong thing, get in trouble. We even had a saying that it's like, if you weren't pissing people off, you weren't doing your job. You know, it was kind of a really politically correct kind of an environment, and I'm so against this whole PC political correctness, not Windows PC. I'm so against that political correctness, and things in good taste. Like, I hate that. I'm willing to do something that's risky and strange, and just for the sake of being creative. I mean, like Brian Eno, go to the extreme and then retreat, you know, to a usable position. I mean, that's sort of my philosophy. Like, let's just push it and see how far we can go with it, and then let's figure out that was too far and then back up. I mean, that's how I would do anything. That's just the way I would do things.
Right.
Usually, you don't know that you've gone too far until you got in trouble.
And did Apple give you enough space to do this? Or
No,
not at all.
No. I rarely ever got permission or support for doing most of the things I ever did. It was always an argument. It was always difficult. It was always politically troubling to people. It was really frustrating. That was why, in fact, why I quit Apple. I was just fed up with the battles, and you know, doing the same thing for the last 8 years or so. When I was even trying to push for a tool, believe it or not, another side story, I guess it kind of ties into your question. Around 1996, I was pushing on this idea. I had written a paper and I even done a presentation on it of a tool that would help you download MP3 files, organize them into playlists, help you rip CDs. It would connect to CD-DB, automatically name the tracks. It would let you share playlists. I had a whole bunch of things about this. And then even that you could sync, and the metaphor at the time was the Palm desktop, and the Palm Desktop Manager and the Palm, you know, handheld device, where the Desktop Manager let you type and organize and create content and you know, edit it and everything. Because you had a mouse and a keyboard and a big screen, and then you would sync it to a little handheld device, and the little handheld device was just a little reference, right? So using that metaphor, I had said that you would have this other software application that would help you organize all of your songs, and then you would sync it to a handheld device that just had nothing but a play button on it, right? And so I had written up this idea, had presented it, I had described it, I talked about it, I'd thought about it for a long time. I'd even started writing some code around that idea, and I was trying to pitch it to some of the marketing people, some of the executives, and like none of them were interested. They all told me to stop working on it. Even at one point, the manager of my group told me to stop working on this project and get back to my job. So that's like another perfect example. So this is 1996, right, when I was pushing on this thing, and finally, in frustration of not being able to do things that I thought would be useful, valuable, desirable, successful things, I quit in '99. Like 3 years later, I just gave up. trying to get anything done. And then eventually Jobs figured it out and ended up going out and finding such a product from someone who I had given those ideas to.
So we can trace back iTunes to you, basically? If you go far enough?
If you want to go back to '96,
yeah.
I can show you the documents and the papers and the designs and the presentations I had done. And I mean, I don't want to name names and do all this kind of nonsense about it, but yeah, it is kind of sad that I had
at least,
that.
I mean, despite the fact that you were the guy that came up with it, are you happy with the way they did it right now? I mean, is this really what Is this how you would have done it?
That's another kind of interesting love-hate thing. The first few versions, for the first few years, I told a lot of people I thought iTunes was the best product I'd ever used. Like, it was the best application. It had some fantastic features. Some of them, were mine in a sense. But I mean, I would talk about them. They were like ideas and vision, and then I'll give a lot of credit to people that actually implemented and shipped it. I mean, it's one thing to have an idea. It's another one to actually be able to ship it. So I'm not trying to. I can't take credit away from the people that did that kind of work. But the idea and the vision of it, I swear, I should have a lot more money. I never got any money from it, but the first few years of it I thought was fantastic. Like, it was definitely one of the best products I had ever used, and I spent more time using that than almost any other product. But lately, I think they've gone off track.
Did they lose the focus of music? Or?
Yeah. What's the English expression about something has gone off the trolley? Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
It's now it's silly. Now it's not making any sense at all. It's called iTunes, right? It's supposed to manage music, and then it started managing your phone, and then it's managing, browsing for movies and selling of content, and it's like a browser, and then it's synchronizing your address book and your photos, and like, what part of iTunes does all that other crap belong? So, and now it's like an iPad device, and it even provisions and activates your phone. I'm like, oh. Right. I mean, this is why I gave up being an engineer and became a product manager, because I love good product designs, and product designs are based upon a discipline, and there's a near scientific kind of methodology behind good product management, and now it's not making any sense to me. Like, it's called iTunes.
That's a very good point. If I may, just to go back real briefly to your vision on sound, actually, on the computer. First of all, what do you think of the sounds on the Mac and on the iPhone, for example, today? I mean, the iPhone has this very distinctive ringtone. What do you think of that? I mean, have they lost track in that sense as well, or are they still doing a good job, even without you?
Even without me? Well, apparently. Ask Wall Street, they're doing a damn good job. But for me, it's art. Like, there's an aesthetic thing. I mean, I'm very keen and intrigued and passionate about design. And you just don't throw out sounds. Like, most people in the world think of ringtones as that annoying sound. Like, they're ridiculously annoying. So you have to be. It's not like everybody can be a musician. Only certain people can do that. There's a design. There's a philosophy. There's an artistic sense to it. And so I don't know if I would agree that a lot of the sounds I've been hearing are coming from somebody who has that design aesthetic. Like, I mean, you have graphic designers, and you don't just let anybody start doing UI design. Right. But it seems like anybody is allowed to do sound design. I mean, I studied nearly my entire life doing sound and audio and sound design. So, yeah, I wouldn't agree that all of that stuff is working out so well. And there's a philosophy I talk about, like poisoning the well. Like at some point, they're not going to drink from it anymore. You know, it's just over. And no matter how much you might fix it in the future, it's been ruined. You know, people won't do it anymore.
Now, I mean, you mentioned the reason why you left Apple and why you probably will never want to go back there. But theoretically, if you would come back there, could you change all that? I mean, is there enough to change? I mean, to get the focus back on the audio?
Yeah, it's interesting, huh? That for a company that has done so much to change the market and the consumption of music, that I don't know that they have that sense of how important audio is, as much as like they would recognize that UI is important, and graphics and color and buttons and user interaction. But I don't hear anything here, is the definitive word, I don't hear anything about how audio is important to the design, other than, you know, a little bit. Like, I mean, now finally they put stereo speakers on these things, and they put a little bit better speakers, you know, but not to where I would do it. Like, I would make audio a key component of the user interface. One of the things I had done, I had patched out the whole Finder at one point and had added audio to all of the user interaction of the Finder. So clicking on a menu, selecting objects, dragging things.
8, right? Or
nah, that was the toxic version.
Okay.
That was the nasty horde.
I was going to say, because I turned that one
Yeah,
off.
I know, and I had nasty arguments with the team that was working on that, telling them like, this is horrible.
Right.
This is horrible. So I had done my own. Like, they had a whole team of people working on it for a very long time, and they had spent so much money. It was just completely a terrible project, and I had argued with them all for the longest time. And they were doing like circus sounds, like calliope music and stuff, and I'm like, this is so annoying.
What did you do? What was your version?
I just wrote my own little patch. Like within about a week, I had cranked out patches to all the user interface elements. Like a dialogue would pop up. Clicking on buttons were different than, you know. So I had chosen the main. I had mapped out like the method I had used. Like I said, there's a science to this stuff. I had mapped out objects and actions on a matrix, basically noun verbs. So like a window sound was always an instrument, and windows are glass. So I had a glass sound that I had designed, and like opening a window was always 2 notes that would go up, da-da, and you close the window, it would go da-da, right? So there was always an instrument for every object, and for every action there was always a melody, a 1, 2, maybe 3 note melody, and they were really subtle, really quiet, but opening a different object, like launching an application, would always be the same 2 notes, da-da, but a different instrument, right? So it would make sense. It was kind of like a Peter and the Wolf, you know, every character had its own instrument, and every melody meant, you know, happy, sad, whatever. So I had mapped it out, like, and it was actually really enjoyable, and so I was using it. I mean, I wrote this code in like a week or so. These guys had tons of money and a big team, and it was horrid. And I actually really enjoyed it. I found it, and every time it would do the wrong thing, I would tune it, and, you know, and I was like the only guy ever using it, you know, and I used it for a couple of years on my Mac.
Right. So, but it never came out into the system.
I couldn't get anybody at Apple interested in it.
Right.
Meanwhile, they had shipped this whole other crappy thing. Right.
And now with the iPhone, they're kind of doing it, right? I mean, actions have certain sounds, or is that really different?
But it's not making sense to me. It's like, you know,
the philosophy behind it is not the.
It's like the kid who never really studied music.
Right.
But learned how to play guitar is now composing music, you know, like, I guess that kind of works, but not really. I mean, there's a difference between somebody who's actually studied in this art.
Now, I mean, I'm pretty sure that you can agree that in the old days, the days that you worked there, that it was a very clear distinction between Apple sounds and Windows sounds. You know, sounds on the Mac, sounds on the Windows PC. Is there still a distinction to be made, or is it pretty much the same philosophy these days?
I could not even guess what the hell goes on inside of Microsoft. I mean, that's a huge juggernaut. The one thing I can remember was when we had done the Mac startup sound, I mean, Windows doesn't own the hardware, so you can't turn on the computer and make a sound. It actually would still beat like an ancient DOS machine, right? But then when Windows would load, it would play a sound. And so they hired Brian Eno to make the startup sound, and I actually had a conversation with Brian Eno about this before he got hired to go do his. So I mean, that's kind of an interesting little connection there. Like I'm a huge Brian Eno fan. I mean, when I started listening to his music and studying, I mean, he's a true artist, right? Like he studied. He actually didn't study music, but he studied art and painting. He's a painter, right? So he has a strong artistic sense, and I got a lot of creative inspiration. And I mean, I probably have. He has a lot of recordings, and I probably have about 85% of everything he's ever recorded, and a ton of other things, videos, books, tons of other things. I even have a deck of his discrete, his record collection, and what was the deck of cards with oblique strategies. Yeah, see, I'm getting way too far off. Anyway, it was a card. Like you would shuffle the deck and open a card, and it would give you a creative inspiration, like run around the block, eat a peanut butter sandwich. I mean, whatever. There's like a bunch of this wacky things that would kind of like shock you out of the rut that you would get stuck in. So the idea is, whenever you got stuck, you would open one of these cards, just do whatever it said. I like that kind of philosophy. So anyway, he had a huge effect on me. So it was amazing. Like one of my personal most amazing moments was I got to sit and talk with Brian Eno, and we talked about composing 2-second pieces of music. And then he ends up and he gets hired. He got paid a lot more money than I didn't get paid anything. Like, I think he got like a check for like 35 grand or something like this to do that piece of music. And then they started using it, and but they don't ever seem to use artists for that kind of design. They might use an engineer, which is not who you want to do that, or they might use like a user interface designer, which is not what like I said, like the Sonic Finder ended up with like circus sounds. What the fuck?
Ever thought of, I guess it would be theoretically possible to put out your own sound interaction design? I don't know if you could call it
well,
out.
I don't
put it out as a plugin for OS X?
Yeah, but I don't code anymore, and that's the whole grief is, I had to give it up. It was like just ruining my brain writing code all day long. I mean, there's definitely a level of concentration that I just find, I don't know, it's just horrible, Like it was just killing my creativity, my thought, and just making me a very angry, bitter person writing code all day long. So I had to give it up. I literally had to give it up. Like to this day, there's a lot of things, like I refuse to calculate the tip on a check because it requires too much left brain thinking. So, not that I don't tip well. But I bring up my phone and just dial in the number, and then I still round it up to the even dollar. Like, I don't care. I don't even want to think about it. Just that kind of level is just such a distraction. So if you're not using the left part of the brain anymore, you're using the creative part. What do you do these days? I do a lot of photography. A lot of photography. Like, I'm shooting as much as I can. Photography is a big one for me right now. Doing just as much photography as possible. I'd always loved it. I've been shooting for 30-some years, but now the digital quality of cameras is fantastic, and photography is fantastic art. It's an endless amount of learning and developing, and you can have a unique expression in your photography. I mean, no two photographers that are any good will see the same thing the same way and show you the same image. So it's great. Like, photography is a big passion. Right.
It's like the complete opposite of a computer, which does exactly what you tell them to. Again.
And to me, it's a very right brain thing. Now, there's a lot of geeks that have been buying cameras, and they want to talk about, all the numbers and the f-stops and the aperture setting and why you need this. Who fucking cares, man? Like, it's your eye, and it's seeing light and understanding the beauty of something, and it's mostly all light, and like I could take a really damn good photo just using an iPhone. The iPhone actually does pretty good photos. Like, I'm surprised. Of all the camera phones, it's by far the best one I've ever seen. They're doing something in the software that makes those images look really nice. But it's just light. Like, it's just your eye. You have to develop your eye and your aesthetic sense and your right brain to see it. So I don't care what your camera is, but that's a left brain kind of geeky thing. Like, you know, Nikons are better, and I'm like, no, they're not.
Right. Now, last question. If Steve Jobs himself calls you one day and asks you to activate your left part of the brain again, would you take him up on that? Would you do it?
I think that's very unlikely that I would ever.
I mean, just theoretically.
Theoretically.
I mean, you say there's enough to be done in OS 10, in iTunes, on the iPhone.
There's lots of work that could be done.
Yeah.
And to this day, audio. I mean, and it's not just Apple. I mean, like even Hollywood, even the game designers that develop games for Xbox or the PlayStation or even movies in Hollywood, audio is the last thing they think about. You know, it gets 10% of the budget, and it's the very last thought. And, they're just slap some audio on there. You know, that's just, people don't understand audio. They don't understand music, and so that's just true everywhere you go. But I would love to have the audio taken as seriously as the graphics. I think it is as important. The chance that Steve would ever want to talk to me about this stuff, practically nil. And even if he considered it to be important, would he talk to me? Unlikely. But would I talk to him? Absolutely. Would there be a position for me at Apple? It's back to unlikely. Would I do engineering? No. But I would, lead a vision or something like that, talk about the planning and what it should do and how it should work and that kind of a thing, but I wouldn't write the code anymore.
Okay, but like you said, it's pretty unlikely, and you're happy just doing photography in the meantime, right?
Well, I can't make money doing photography, so I mean, I have to earn a living. I have a 3 o'clock call here today with unemployment, trying to get some checks out of them.
Okay, well then I guess we should end this interview and let you get on your way. Thank you so much.
Sure, absolutely fun.